Hello everybody and welcome to tonight's webinar, which is webinar 16 in the series held between Emerging Minds and the Mental Health Practitioners Network. Tonight we've got a really exciting webinar for you. It's about engaging fathers and their children. And my name's Dan Moss. I welcome you all to what's going to be a great webinar, and note that we've got 400 plus people watching already. So look forward to presenting this webinar to you tonight. Before we start, Emerging Minds and MHPN wishes to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land across Australia upon which our webinar presenters are located. We wish to pay respect to the elders past, present and future for the memories, the culture and hopes of Indigenous Australia. So a little bit of housekeeping. Welcome to Series 3. This has been a few years now that we've been able to provide these webinars for you, and we love being able to do that. Just to let you know that we've got some upcoming webinars as part of this partnership. They include practice skills of working with children who have experienced trauma. That'll be on the night of the 19th of November, so looking forward to having your company on that night. Working with parents who have had their children removed. Overcoming challenges to engage children, and a special webinar later in the year on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. So if you'd like to know more about these upcoming webinars, please subscribe to Emerging Minds at www.emergingminds.com.au/subscribe. So for those of you who are new to this platform, just a bit of housekeeping. So if you're wanting to open the chat room and post a question or see what other questions people are posting, please use the purple icon. The blue icon if you want to ask the panel a question, and later tonight we'll be having a question and answer session where you'll be able to ask our panellists some questions. The light blue icon if you want to access resources, including the case study, the panel biographies and supporting resources, yellow for opening the survey, and green to reload the page or webinar room. So as far as tonight goes, it's all about engaging fathers. And we want you to leave tonight's webinar presentation having achieved some basic learning outcomes. They are, we want you to be able to identify ways of working with fathers to improve access and engagement with a service. We want you to be able to describe ways of talking to fathers about their hopes and concerns for children. We want you to be able to identify ways of supporting fathers when they're engaging in behaviours that have negative influence on their child's mental health. So it's a fairly ambitious program we've got for you tonight. And we'll kind of get cracking on that by introducing you to tonight's panel. There's a really great panel we have for you tonight, which consists of Don Alford, a social worker from Victoria, John Clark, who's an Emerging Minds child and family partner, does a lot of great work with us, and Dr. Bruce Robinson, AM, who is a physician in WA, and many of you will know the founder of the Fathering Project in WA. So Don, let's start with you, and just as a way of introduction, I'm really keen to know, in your role with fathers, how do you have conversations which are non-shaming and engaging, but at the same time, centre the needs of children?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. My role with fathers, just if you haven't or don't already know about what I do, but I work on a project around fatherhood with Relationships Australia Victoria, and yeah, with the conversations with dads, just trying to keep it really trying to focus on I guess fatherhood as the motivator in those conversations, so that trying to make them non-shaming and engaging in a way that, you know, where they get to tell the stories about being a dad, and they get to talk about the things that they do really well as a starting point. And then from there, you can really help to unpack what's going on for those dads, and maybe some of the things where they might be feeling shameful about their behaviours or actions or their role So I think just as a starting point, getting them to tell a bit of their story, I think is just going to be really helpful, no matter, regardless of whatever situation they're in and how they're engaging with you. And you get to share, and then you build up a bit of rapport and trust through that as well. And that's something, that sort of narrative approach can work really well with dads, I've found.
Yeah, thank you, John. John, the next question's for you, and thanks for joining us tonight and for sharing some of your lived experience. And in your experience of service provision, what advice would you have for practitioners about effectively engaging fathers?
Yeah, I think it's definitely tricky engaging fathers, but I think the thing that fathers all have in common is that their children are probably the most valuable thing to them in the world. So we're talking about something that they're passionate about. They obviously know a lot about their kids as well, so we're engaging them in their area of strengths and passions. So getting dads to talk about their kids, the things that they enjoy doing with their kids, the hopes that they've got for their kids, I think that definitely engages men. And they're starting from a position of strength, I guess. So I think if we can start on that and then find out what can be improved in that situation, then we're working from a strength into an area of growth, potentially.
Thanks so much, John. Looking forward to hearing your presentation in a little while. Our next guest is Dr. Bruce Robinson, former Western Australian of the Year, and as many of you know, the founder of the Fathering Project. Bruce, as a physician, what was it that motivated you to begin the Fathering Project?
No, great question. Thanks, because I've thought about this a lot. So I'm a lung specialist, and I have to deal with men who are dying. And part of the journey of being a caring physician is to talk to them. And I got really, to be honest, frustrated and upset at the number of men who said they wish they could have their life all over again, because they would spend more time with their kids, and they've missed out and it's too late. And it's kind of heartbreaking. It's a deeply personal and intimate moment with patients. So to be honest, I didn't mean to start the Fathering Project. I just wrote a book and did a research project about drug addiction, and the next thing you know, we got this Fathering Project rolling out all the way across Australia in all the schools of Australia, getting to all the schools of Australia as a goal. So it was really from my consulting room and the sadness I felt that drove that.
Thanks so much, Bruce. Really looking forward to hearing from you further later tonight. And so we've heard from our panellists, and tonight you'll know that we're going to think a little bit about the case study of Gary. So Gary's got a couple of kids. He's got a few issues at the moment that are going on for him in his life, and we want you, as we go along, as we've asked our panellists to do, is to think about what you would do if Gary came into your service. What would you do to make him feel welcome? What would you do to engage Gary? And really importantly, what would you do to help Gary think about what he needs to do, as Bruce was saying, to have the kind of relationship with his children that he would like? So I'll hand over to Dom without any further ado.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So just from the case study, just the key thing that sort of stuck out for me, really in working with this dad was around his identity. And I think that's really important as a starting point for you, just to reflect on how this guy's going. So with the issues around his employment and some of the things that his behaviour, he's probably not feeling too great about that. So I think focusing on his identity as a dad and how that identity around fatherhood is linked to his employment as well is really important. So from a lot of the work that I've been doing and the dads that have come across Australia in the last couple of years, a lot of it is around the identity of fatherhood, is around being that kind of a breadwinner and playing that kind of role. And there's some really strong links there. It's really well sort of ingrained in us in Australia as the role of the dad is to be the breadwinner and to be a provider for the family in that role. So, the things that led up to the father losing his employment, if I remember the case correctly, that they're the things that that they're sort of their side issues, but what he's feeling right now and presently would be a lot of sort of grief and loss around his identity as well. So even just having the chance to get the dad to tell some stories about how he's going and what kind of father he is and what kind of father he likes to be and some of those positive things, just to start unpacking, well, what does it mean to him as a father? And, and you might find some things there that can help you engage him. And if he's sharing stories, that helps with the engagement as well. So, yeah, and some of the work I've done around with this sort of breadwinner role and the provider role is just getting to say to men and dads that there's more to being a dad than just being a breadwinner or a provider for your family. Yes, it's the role that we're sort of culturally expected to be in terms of our families' expectations, our own expectations, but in media, on TV ads and that kind of thing, and wherever you look, it's sort of dads are expected to go to work and in workplaces as well, expecting men to be there after they've had a baby and just go straight back into the role they were doing. So there's a lot of expectation there as well. So a lot of that, with that comes pressure as well. So exploring different types of fatherhood and ways they can be a dad as well as being a provider is really important, because it can just sort of unpack different things that they already do or could be doing or want to do. And it can help, with that conversation and maybe alleviate some pressure they put on themselves as well. And in terms of their relationship with their kids, I think when you're going to talk about fatherhood, you're going to talk about the relationship with their children as well. So it's really important to talk to them and get them to tell stories again. How do when you spend time with the kids, what do you get up to? What do you guys do? And even if it's simple things like just going to the park, or they always tag along when I'm doing the shopping, or go to get a coffee with my mates, or whatever it is. Even if it's really simple things, there just highlighting that even those moments, they're bonding opportunities, and you are being a role model for your kids in the way you behave and talk with your friends, or the things you do. So there's some really positive opportunities there. So highlighting the role that they play and the bond they have with their kids is really important. And the second point I put there is being apart from your children. I've had the chance to work with a lot of dads who are separated as well. And I've come across some great research that's talking about the way we can bond with kids, that is not only the obvious stuff, the one-on-one stuff, but it's when you're apart from them. There's lots of things you can be doing that is considered bonding, and it contributes to that bond. So highlighting that when you're separated, or if you're at work all the time, you feel like you don't have that chance to connect, and you barely see them, or you don't actually live with them, or you don't have custody. There's so many things you can be doing for your kids that is bonding, and it is connecting with them, even though you're not physically there. So that's something I think really important to unpack as well, because that can cause a lot of, maybe shame and grief as well, if they're feeling like they're not bonding with their kids. And finally, just talking about the really important bit for you is how you engage these dads and how do they access your service, because that's the biggest barrier I've seen across Australia is that when we talk about services, we're talking about mums and kids engaging with services primarily, and so there's a lot of things going on there that you need to unpack. You need to reflect on, I guess, as well, in terms of how you sort of present yourself to families, your service, and then also be mindful of how dads might engage with your service. So there's a lot of barriers going on. There's not just a sort of a two-way street that dads need to do more and service need to do more. So for dads, there's lots of things around their expectations around who engages with the service. So, for example, like a maternal child health nurse centre, you're expecting that mums and kids go along, and then dads might be expecting that they need to go along or they need to attend. And it's about knowing their starting point, I guess, so having some sort of gauge on where they're at. So they might even think it's for them as well. but maybe they're not even interested and then couldn't care less. So that's a barrier as well. Maybe they're just not sure, but then maybe it's about the accessibility of the service and the hours and days that it's available, whether it sort of fits in with full-time work and that kind of thing and business hours. And so making the space really, so for service providers, making the space more welcoming and inclusive and addressing some of those barriers. And that for services that I know as a social worker myself, that when you get a case file and you look at the family, and you're more likely to call the mum because they're going to be available and they'll pick up the phone because they're not less likely to be at work and that kind of thing. And you just sort of automatically go to that. So it's really ingrained in us as workers that we are more likely to engage with mums, women and children around the family work. So it's really about us sort of just taking a step back and reflecting on what we do and how we might be sort of putting up some barriers ourselves. And that might not be about you as a person. It might just be about the history of the service, what's culturally been the way to do things, and what's really ingrained in that sort of culture of our practice. So really important to reflect on those things as well. And the last point I have there is about working from home. And in Victoria, we're just 2 days into our coming out of lockdown, and it's been just astronomically hard. I just can't think of a bigger word. It's just been the pressure and the intensity of it. It's just been at home, working from home, having kids, doing homeschooling, all that stuff. There's a huge amount of mental health pressure. And I think everyone's feeling everyone's pretty exhausted right now. And so the working from home stuff is going to continue for a long time in Victoria. It probably might happen in different parts of Australia. It might be continuing a little bit, but particularly for those Victorian people that, mental health practitioners, just to be aware of just that layer of sort of pressure. And it does impact in terms of maybe for some dads it's really been really great that they've been at home because they got to do more. And I saw that there was a survey out about who's doing the housework and who's doing the homeschooling and that kind of thing. And they're finding out that some dads are really enjoying and they're getting more involved in those kind of things that were primarily left up to the mums and women. So what we're finding is that, it's just my daughter, not going to bed, I think. But then the flip side of that is it's not always great for all those every dad, and maybe they're doing less and they're leaving more up to mums, or they're just so they're struggling with that balance. So it's really important, I think, just to reflect on those things about not just how dads engage services, but what's going on for them and what may be preventing them.
Thank you so much,
I think that's it
Tom.
for me, Dan. I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, and great to give us a live action kind of indication of
like that BBC
engaging
thing,
with children there. That was lovely. Thank you.
Just on cue, yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yes, it was beautiful. Thank you. Really great presentation there, and I think giving us some real food for thought there in terms of how we might engage with Gary and other fathers, and some great questions coming in from the over 600 of you who have joined us now. So keep those questions coming, and we'll provide them to Don, John and Bruce after the presentations have finished. So now I will hand over to John to give us his presentation. John.
Thanks, Dan, and nice work there, Dom. When my kids were in lockdown and not going to school, I was having arguments with my 15-year-old daughter about why an assignment wasn't stupid. She said it was stupid, and I said, I can't wait for you to go back to school and have this discussion with your teacher. So I guess your challenges are slightly different to mine. As someone with lived experience, when I finally sought help, I was in a world of hurt, a little bit like Gary. Gary's kind of there to get his wife off his back, so he's kind of there kicking and screaming. But big shout out to the women who are a vital part of men's health, because women consistently remind us to get stuff sorted out. We call it nagging. I think women might call it consistent reminders. But either way, sometimes it does get men to address their issues. Like Gary, I didn't want to talk about my problems either. I was really angry. I was suffering major depressive disorder, social anxiety disorder, and I'd gotten to the point where I was considering that taking my life would be the best thing for my family. It'd be the best thing for my wife. Of course, work, send condolences and then put an ad in the paper. So I knew work would move on. And like Gary, I guess I was coping the same way. So I was pretty much drinking daily to try and sort of numb the pain and be able to calm down. And all of that left me feeling really weak and ashamed. And Dom mentioned the idea of shame with men, and I'm not sure that we always think about that. We often think of men being stubborn and men being angry and men being vocal or men being withdrawn or hiding or those kind of things. But shame was a really big deal for me, and that stopped me from getting help for a long time. I was obviously very angry as well, and just exhausted. So men are often in seeking help when under sufferance. And it's a little bit like chewing sand for a bloke sometimes to get help. But I think the good thing is to acknowledge that he's there and to acknowledge that it's taken a fair effort to get there, and that this might be even feeling a little bit uncomfortable, but acknowledging that that the effort that a bloke's putting into being there, even if he's under sufferance, I think is important to do. So as a dad, I guess I was pretty raw. 11 years ago, there was a photo of me. We were looking through some photos the other day, and I was looking really unkempt. I'd grown a beard. I'd shaved my head because I just couldn't bring myself to go to the hairdresser. And my daughter was looking through those photos, and she said, that's the scary dad photo. And she was about 4 or 5 when I was really unwell. And it was just like a knife to the heart for me. I just felt so sad and ashamed that I was scaring my daughter and my children. And I guess when I went to get help with this stuff from a counsellor, I was kind of afraid of being judged because I was embarrassed about how I was behaving. I knew I was behaving badly. I just couldn't find a way to change it. So I think men are often feeling really vulnerable when they get into to asking for help. So it's just really important to build that rapport, finding that common ground. Men really respect skill, competency, and authenticity. So if someone's not really being authentic with us, I think we can tell, and we don't necessarily respect that. And I think for men to be able to get something out of a service, they're going to have to need respect. And we respect skill, competency, and authenticity. So building that rapport based on common ground, based on strengths. And I think practitioners shouldn't be afraid to disclose a little bit about themselves as well. So I work as a peer support worker now using my lived experience, and a little bit of disclosure, I think, can really be disarming, even using examples from your own life about how you've developed a certain skill, the skill that you're talking to the man about or the dad about. And so I think all those factors can build that rapport, and we can't kind of skip that step, because if we do skip it, we're not going to be able to get to the really good stuff with men. Feelings is an interesting one, because men like to talk about things that they're competent at, and we're not competent in dealing with emotions. And as I said, some of our emotions are around fear, embarrassment, and shame, but not even knowing what those emotions are and being able to understand and articulate what you're feeling is very difficult. I now know that I was feeling embarrassment and shame, but I could not have articulated that whatsoever, because I was experiencing, I guess, what it is termed male normative alexithymia, just where I had no words for emotions. I couldn't actually articulate it. And so the counsellor that I was seeing was able to start to articulate what they sensed I was feeling, so they had to kind of guess a little bit. And she would say, "So you're really angry about what's happening to you?" And I thought, yeah, I am really angry about it. And for me as a father, we've got to be able to deal with emotions with our kids and talk about how we feel about our kids. And we've got to be able to help kids articulate their feelings as well and model this. And I guess no one ever modeled it for me, so I had no language for emotions. And so it's really important as a dad that I teach kids about feelings and how they operate. So I was really upskilling quite quickly at this point. And one of the things that helped was looking at mood, so 0 to 10 scale. Like most guys are into cars and stuff like that, so they look at the revs on their car and they know when it's redlining and things like that. So even using those kind of metaphors, but 0 to 10 scale works well. 0 is I don't want to live anymore. 10 is I'm really happy. Where would you put your mood at today? And why do you think it's there? Why do you think it's at a 5 and not a 0 or whatever it might be? So using the 0 to 10 scale can help. But as I said, guessing can help as well, and kind of working it out and hashing it out together, what some of those feelings are, because we've got to be equipped to deal with them, and that was part of my recovery. Of course, normalising feelings is just powerfully helpful as well. So for the psychologist to say to me, you're really angry, and you know what, that's really common that men feel angry about their relationships, and they might feel angry about how they feel treated by their partner or the situation that they find themselves in. And so normalising those feelings was just absolutely amazing for me. And in many ways, of course, because I was dealing with suicidality, I'd really lost hope. And I was avoiding the kids. I wasn't engaging with them like I would, I wasn't really living out my values because I was so unwell. But every month that I went to the psychologist, she would say, you know what, things are going to get better, things are going to improve. I can give you some skills that are going to really work well here, and you are going to recover. One of the things that I talked to her about was the fact that I was drinking daily, and she said, you know what, this will go away once we deal with the underlying depression and anxiety. And I never left her office without feeling hopeful that things could change for me. I guess one of the elephants in the room is masculinity, and I think we just have to kind of deal with this. I mean, we talk a lot about toxic masculinity, but not necessarily how to accommodate masculinity in our work. And this is a bit of a problem. I recently accessed an EAP, and I rang the EAP, and they said that your local counsellor will get in touch with you. She called me. She said, oh, I'm at this particular hairdresser and I rent an office at the back of this hairdresser. So you just have to walk through the front door and walk through the hairdressers, and then I'm out the back. And I just hated that. And I dislike sitting in waiting rooms with still life pictures of paintings of flowers and stuff, and pastels and things. And it just makes me feel uncomfortable. So we already know that help seeking is poor. I feel like we need to think about how we can actually reduce those barriers to help seeking by accommodating sort of some of the traditional ideas of masculinity, because it probably won't cost us anything. So using empowering language really works for me. So rather than we can get you help or we can help you, because a lot of guys just don't resonate with the idea of getting help, is to use sort of more action-based language, like what are the next steps for you? And I wonder if we could work on next steps. I wonder if we could work on some strategies. I wonder if I could give you some skills, because we're kind of across the idea of upskilling. We're kind of across the idea of having a bit of a plan, and language can kind of underlie how men sort of think, and we can kind of align ourselves. And the interesting thing about blokes is we're actually really good at DIYing stuff. We're actually really good at getting help. The big home hardware chain in America called Home Depot had this brilliant saying, you can build it, we can help. So they're kind of like, we'll give you technical advice, we'll provide you tools, we'll provide you everything you need to DIY this stuff. And so as dads, we want to DIY our relationship with our kids. No one else can do it for us, but it'd be great if we had some skills and tools around it, just the same as the mechanic helps us with our car and the Sparky helps us with our wiring. I just talk to guys about outsourcing this stuff to the experts. So using metaphors can help them. It's important to start where the bloke wants to start with. For me, I think the most important thing that I had to deal with was my depression. That was the thing that was most painful to me. And so it's kind of like scratching where it itches. There was a whole lot of chaos going on in my life. There was marital strain, there was constant conflict there was the alcohol problem, there was the anxiety, there was the estrangement from the kids. But I wanted to work on depression. That was kind of my way in. And as I started to get some success there, it kind of rolled on to success in other areas. And when it comes to fathering, as I said earlier, it's the most important thing in my life. It's the thing that has most meaning to me. So engaging me around that is just absolutely vital to me. It's the thing that I love the most, and it's the thing that that matters the most. So putting recovery in the context of how this is going to make you a better dad and how this is going to reinforce your relationship and repair that relationship, it kind of puts all the hard, yucky work into context of something that's a much bigger goal. Being super practical, the first counsellor I saw didn't really work out for me, because he just basically asked me how I felt about that for about 7 months. And then he said I had an existential crisis, and I still don't really know what that means. So I actually switched to another counsellor in the same clinic, and they were absolutely amazing. They were super practical, and they ended up giving me a piece of paper every day with stuff to think about between our meetings, because my mind went to mush, couldn't really concentrate, couldn't focus, I couldn't remember stuff. And so they were writing stuff down for me on bits of paper, and I'd really, honestly, I would cling to those bits of paper like they were my life. And I'd look at them and I'd think about them, and she'd say, "You're here, and we're going to get to here, and we're going to go this route." And it's kind of almost like having a bit of an action plan, I guess, or a bit of a roadmap. And so drawing it and writing it down was absolutely give us some instructions, give us some flyers, point us to some websites, give us some homework, stuff that we can actually do rather than just stuff to think about. So, you know, you don't have to be a great drawer, just kind of do it like that one that's on the screen there. But that's pretty cool. That kind of gives us an illustration of what we're going to be doing together over the next few months. So thanks. Over to you, Dan.
Thanks so much, John. I think two things stand out from me in hearing your wonderful presentation. Firstly, how fortunate it was that you were able to be connected with such an amazing psychologist. And second of all, I think how fortunate we are tonight to hear such an insightful and generous description of your own experiences. So I really want to extend our gratitude for that. So next we are going to Bruce. So Bruce, welcome, and I will hand over to you.
So if Gary's in my office, I am seriously worried about this guy. He's got a lot of signs that tell me that in a year or so, this guy's going to be a divorced, unemployed alcoholic whose kids will not want to visit him. And he'll just go down and down. And he's a long way on that road already, so I really want to help him. And really to help anyone who's on that road to where Gary is now. He's right. He's losing his family. His kids don't want to be around him. He's lonely and he feels helpless. And what I want to talk about is what I've called professional help plus. And what I love is John's thing about the Bunnings equivalent in America that says, you can do this, we're just going to help you. And so I'm going to talk about the Fathering Project and how that's the sort of Bunnings, if you like, to help you do it yourself. So just my own experience, obviously as a doctor, I've been a doctor for 40 plus years and talked to a lot of people like Gary. Been heavily involved in sporting clubs and talked to a lot of men who are dads, thousands of them in my role as a coach and player and now a club patron. This is Australian football. And then I'll talk more obviously about the Fathering Project, which is something that could help Gary and which hopefully the listeners and viewers will see that as an additional, not instead of, but as addition to professional help, a powerful addition to professional help. So when we talk about the Fathering Project, sorry, just hang on a second. We think about the difference between, I guess, Rambo and platoon. So a lot of guys want to be Rambo, and John mentioned this too, you know, they think, I don't need anyone's help. But our observation in the Fathering Project is that we function better as dads in a platoon because there's a limit to what you can do as a Rambo. And the Fathering Project is about generating a platoon. So, you know, what is the Fathering Project? The Fathering Project is a project that's about filling a friendship gap. In other words, creating a community of men and then working out, and tonight we'll talk about how can Gary engage with such a group. So just a quick summary. The Fathering Project was established as a health promotion activity for children, because it's been shown that if a child has a strong and appropriate father figure, they're kind of 50% less likely to do drugs, 30% less likely to have teenage depression, about 92% less likely to go to jail, etc. But we have seen a spectacular change in the fathers. And we know, and it's been mentioned already, the way to a father's heart is through his children. And it's been the number of transformational stories we've heard from the dads who have kind of accidentally got involved in this platoon, this Bunnings Plus, and it's changed their lives. So we strongly understand the effect on dads, not just on children. So just quickly, it's a university-based activity. It's about research and best practice. It's secular. It has no political, religious, or other agenda. It's got a laser-like focus purely on helping dads be better dads and engaging with other dads in the process. It's been funded by the federal government now. It's been rolled out in every state's got an office CEO. We're getting hundreds and hundreds of schools involved, dads groups in schools, lots of resources. I think we have 35,000 social media engagements every month during COVID, or every week, I'm not sure, and over 1.5 million kind of regular radio and TV media connections as well. And the plan is to be in, the federal government's plan, just so you know, is to be in half of primary schools in Australia within 5 years. And so if you think about a guy like Gary, he comes along, and the first picture is holding his son's hand. He's going to year one, because you got to go there first day. You do your duty, and you go there on that first day. You don't expect to do any more, but you get scooped up by this platoon of dads, the dads groups. The next thing you know, he's having a hill trolley derby with all these dads, and then he's having a camp out on the school playground. And during this whole process, he's getting exposed to ideas about fathering, just short 10-minute whatever discussions about fathering. And here's a fantastic picture of a group of dads from the Fathering Project. And some of the subjects, just so you know, that we talk about are bullying. Every dad cares about their kids being bullied. It's particularly cyberbullying. How they can help with education. What about dads and daughters? Dads have no idea. What about separated dads? What about being a father figure to other kids? And then what do kids really need from their dads? Not, as been discussed already, not just discipline and providing for them, school fees, etc. What do they really need? What do I get up in the morning and say my kids need from me? And just look at that picture there of one of our dads groups meeting. And just imagine for a moment Gary sitting at one of those tables, listening to the other dads talking about their journey as a dad. Maybe they're separated, maybe they've also had depression or got issues, busyness, etc., fly in, fly out. They're sharing knowledge, and then we give them a 10 or 15-minute best practice video, usually with a facilitator, etc., and they go away and talk about it, and it's a very powerful force. But I love the idea of Gary being one of those people at one of these tables. So just quickly then, this is a way that Gary can regain his relationship with his kids. And men like Gary, like typical men, they say, well, just give me one idea. I know you've got all these books and everything, but just give me your best idea. Give me your number one best idea so that tomorrow I know what to do differently. And we actually think that's quite good, because if you gave them 10, they wouldn't do any. But give them one, they'll wake up in the morning and say, oh, yeah. And so just FYI, because you're listening, tonight I'll give you one idea. We have what we call the BUS strategy. This summarises what kids need from their dads, and this is what Gary could do. B stands for being there. Always be there for your kids. Let them know you'll always be there for them. Number 2, unconditional love. That's what the U is, BUS. Your love does not depend on whether they're good at school, well-behaved, get called up the deputy principal, good at sport or not. Your love is unconditional, and make sure you tell them that as well. And the final S is let them know that they're special. Fantastic notion that each kid would feel special. They don't at the moment. I bet his kids don't. And Gary could work on that. And just to focus on number 3 there, special, here's, again, one example of how to make kids feel special, which we call dad dates. So Gary could start taking his kids out on dad dates. Look at this picture and you'll see three key elements. First of all, it's dad alone, not dad with his mates or with his wife. It's one child, not all his kids, and they're having fun. He's not preaching at him. And so this works a treat, honestly. Everyone who's tried it. It may not work for Gary straight away, but eventually it will. So really, Gary, in addition to the professional help, he really needs a platoon of other men who can, friends who'll care and listen to him about his journey, and a community of men who can care about being good dads. So if you have men like this, then just Google the Fathering Project and you'll be able to connect Gary either to a school, if his kids are in one of those schools, or to online interaction about how to be a better dad. And it will have a spectacular effect on Gary himself, not just on his kids. Thanks. Back to you, Dan.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Really appreciate that. Question for you to start with, Bruce, if that's okay. We've got a question come in, many questions come in from our audience through the chat room, from the 653 participants we have, so keep the questions coming. First question is from Chris, and he asks the question of you, Bruce. In areas where the Fathering Project is not yet available for fathers, what can practitioners do to help fathers to create that sense of community and support networks that you've described?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Chris, and we really feel for dads who want to be better dads and get access to this stuff, but then their school is not involved yet in the Fathering Project. So just to simply get on the web and engage with the Fathering Project through our website is the way to do it. During COVID, we created a fathering channel, and every day there's something coming down to help dads be better dads and to establish, I guess, with them, and they can have a few friends together who could watch the material that comes down. So last month we talked about dad's mental health. Prior to that, I think we talked about bullying. Prior to that, about dads in education. Every week there's something, all sorts of things that can help dads. So really it's through the web if you don't have a school that is already plugged into this.
Thank you, Bruce. A question for you, Don. So Kendall has asked, in the scenario of Gary being the sole breadwinner, he's obviously worried about his finances. How do you manage talking to Gary about, obviously, his worries about finances and losing his jobs, compared to having conversations with him about being able to stay connected with his kids?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Yeah, that's a tricky one. I guess it's coming back to the things I talked about how sort of weighing up what's important for him at the moment, and maybe focusing on the kind of things that maybe focusing on the next 24 hours and sort of thinking about, well, what's really important right now? Yes, the finances and employment is going to be a real struggle, and just being really open and honest about that, and getting him to talk about what's happening for you in the next day or two. What are you going to be up to, and are you going to be hanging out with your kids, and just focusing on what you can do right now, I guess. And then maybe looking at, well, in the next week or the next month, that's where you could probably start working on the issues around the finances and talking about how he wants to manage that, or how he's going to have those conversations with his family or with his kids about that as well. So I guess finding some way to gauge where he's at, because you can't sort of, from my experience working with dads going through a crisis, is that you've got to give time to unpack what's actually going on. And I've run parenting groups with people with severe mental health issues, and we don't even get to the content, and we're an hour into the group, and we've only got half an hour to go. So you've got to give time for them to unpack those things that are actually pressing for them now. So maybe a bit of both, sort of a bit of giving time to unpack the financial pressures and things going on in his head and the questions he's got, and just letting him get it out. And then drawing some strengths and positives that he has to keep him going and keep him motivated, I guess. And coming back to that fatherhood is a huge motivator. And while he may not feel like he can provide for his family right now, he can still be a great dad, and he can still be, spending time with his kids and having a really great time, as well as dealing with all the really serious stuff.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, John. John, a question from Tony and others. Really struck by your conversation around hope, and that through your work with your psychologist, how that was that gradually came back for you. Just a little bit of detail about that. Was that something that kind of started to improve straight away, or did it take a little bit of time and a few conversations for that to happen? Was that a little bit of a journey that you went through with your psychologist?
What I think really gave me the most hope was the fact that the psychologist was able to empathise with my feelings, which sounds really soft. You wouldn't think that would really work well for a bloke. But the turning point for me was when the psychologist wrinkled up her face and said, "You're really angry, aren't you?" And it was just like almost instant relief. It was like popping a cork for me. Someone actually connected with the fact that I was really hurting and I was really angry, and that this was real. Because otherwise, when you're experiencing a mental illness, it's kind of, you can't see anything wrong with you. It's all inside. And it almost takes another human to say, this is real, this is really debilitating, this is impacting you, and you're really struggling. You're only just kind of hanging in there. And then it kind of makes it all real. So once that person connected me with in that way, and she just seemed really confident that that we can deal with this. It's going to be okay. People borrow hope when they run out of hope for themselves, and nobody who's thinking about suicide still has any hope left. So, I'd kind of run out of hope, and I was borrowing hope from her. So the fact that she believed that it was going to get better, I really clung to. And I was clinging to her, the fact that she was experienced, that she was professional, and that she knew what she was doing, because I didn't know which way was up.
Yeah, thank you, John. And another question for you. Can you talk a little bit about how you think practitioners can engage with fathers to find out what's important to them about their relationships with children?
Yeah, I think talking to dads about, there's a few ways that you can go about this. Talking to dads about what their relationship with their father was like is a good way, because I think a lot of us are trying to not be like our dads, and we're almost trying to do differently than what we were on the receiving end of. My dad's 83, he's a farmer, he's going to die in his Blunston boots. And when I give my dad a hug, or every now and then I try and give him a hug, he goes really stiff and he doesn't know what to do with his arms. He's just got no idea. So when I became a dad, I cuddled my kids a lot. And, they're kind of a bit bigger now and I have to remember to cuddle them, but I cuddled them a lot because I just didn't want to be like my dad. So even thinking about how did you set out to do your fathering compared to the way you were fathered is kind of a nice way to engage, because, again, we all know how we were fathered. We can talk ad nauseum about that. So, yeah, thinking about how we wanted to differentiate and how we would like things to be with our kids. So the magic wand, if you could wave a magic wand and have a perfect relationship with your kids, what does that look like? How would you describe that? Tell me on a perfect day what it would be like with your kids, things like that.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. Bruce, I might go to you next, because we've got a lot of questions from Kendall and Lindsay and others talking about the reach of the Fathering Project and whether it's available in other states other than Western Australia at the moment, and how people can connect their clients with the project.
Yeah, well, it did start in WA, but it's actually got a bigger presence in New South Wales now. In fact, our national CEO is located in Sydney. It's got a rapidly expanding presence in Queensland as well, and Victoria, and just starting now in South Australia. But yeah, I think, and this has really been driven by COVID, that the web It's become a much more powerful tool for the fathering project than relying on schools. We were, rapidly expanding in the schools. And the schools are great because you get all these dads, like I showed those pictures, they rock up and they get scooped up by the other dads, and the next thing you know, they're having dad dates and doing stuff they would never have done before. And so that was going so well. I think we kind of relied on it a bit too much, but we actually created, I think I mentioned, we created a fathering channel specifically for the 2 million dads at home to get access to. So anyone, anywhere in the country can get access to that. The other thing which I didn't mention before, so Dan, I think it's really important, is if someone, let's say, is in Mount Isa, and, they can't, there's no school dads group up there yet, they can go to their school P&C and say, hey, let's get a few dads and let's just start. We can just start it. Plenty of resources on the website about how you'd start it. And hey, you want to have a father-child camp out. The school's already got a playground and toilets. We resource, we tell the groups how to do it, So you see all these dads and these kids in the tents, 80% never been camping before. They have a little 5-minute thing about it. And it's fantastic. All the dads get to know each other and share their stories and what have you, just with that one camp out. And I've got to admit that I took a photo of one night, all these little lights on in all the tents, and I cried. I just knew that in every tent there was a dad hugging 1 or 2 kids, and I can hear my 2-year-old grandson knocking on the door. Anyway, it's a very powerful thing.
He's escaped.
This is my granddaughter as well. Hi, Chelsea.
Thanks for that, Bruce. Dom, a question for you. So if we look at Gary, he might initially be a little bit reluctant to engage. In fact, he might be, blaming his partner or even his kids for what's happening with him. How do you work with a father to kind of get through that reluctance or that kind of outward projection?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So I think just trying to, I guess, I mentioned getting some gauge on where Gary's at, what his, what his starting point is, I guess. So, if when I've had the experience of, men being reluctant or dads being reluctant, I found that, if they picked up the phone and they've answered the phone call or they called you, it means they're curious. Like, it means that they want to talk about something. If they've turned up to your group or your service, and it means they've got something to share. And it sort of just comes back to that sort of, it doesn't matter at what point they're engaging with your service. If they're actually engaged in any way, it means that, they've surfaced, I guess. And if they're in a crisis, like men will only surface when it's they're right at rock bottom, or it's the biggest crisis they face, and they might not come back up again until the crisis, another crisis down the track. So there's a lot of opportunity there. So I just I always talk to people about just making sure that you capture that moment, because and just getting them to really just to share what's kind of brought you here today, and tell us a bit about your role, what it's like for you as a dad. And when you get that conversation going, being really clear about the role that you play in as a worker in providing the service to Gary, being really clear about the outcomes that he could get from this program as well. So just being really upfront and just really early on, just so that, because there'll be a lot of, I guess, maybe, men are pretty, there's something about trust there. There's something about, there's an instant distrust, but, he's like, well, I'm going to give it a go, or I've been told I should come along. So what have you got to offer me? That kind of thing. I get a lot of that when I do dads groups, is what have you got to offer me? And it's a real sort of the challenge to me that they're putting out. But really, I just remember to remind myself that, look, you're all rocked up, so you're actually really keen. And once I get them to start sharing their stories, you can't stop them talking about fatherhood. And then, and then just highlighting, maybe giving them a case study themselves and saying, well, actually, we had a dad come in the other week, and he was, he really didn't want a bar of this program, but actually by the end, these are the kind of things he told me, like he actually got a lot out of it. And I've had that experience as well, where I had a guy in a group just not wanting to say anything. He didn't say anything throughout the whole session, and I just questioned whether he was actually interested, and he had his arms crossed and he was slouching back in his chair. But at the end, he actually said, "Hey, thanks, Dom. That was really great. I got a lot out of it." I had no idea. So I just think that, if they're there or if they're present or they've made any contact or they've picked up the phone and answered your phone call, you've got to pounce on that opportunity, I guess.
Yeah,
well, it's really interesting you mentioned that. If I can jump in, Dan, sorry. I was
just
giving a talk to some ADF guys down in the Derwent barracks at Hobart earlier on this week, and there was one guy that was sitting there looking really disengaged. And I'm down there and I'm supposed to be talking about mental health and suicide prevention. This guy's just not even making eye contact, arms crossed. And it got about halfway through and we were talking specifically about how can we notice the signs of suicide and what can we do to prevent it. And he piped up and said he'd lost his partner to suicide. So it's really interesting how some people kind of, we perceive that they're disengaged when, they've had a terrible experience or they're really hurting or something like that. And if we can make it a safe space, like you say, you can't shut men up.
Thanks, John. And staying with you, just a question from the chat room about the social and emotional well-being of children. You've talked a little bit about this. What kids need from their dads. How can that become a motivational factor for fathers in seeking help and in fact making change?
I guess as someone with lived experience, a lot of my motivation for recovery was to learn how to maximise my well-being or maintain my well-being, because I never wanted to get sick again. I never wanted to be that unwell again. It was just a horrendous experience. So what I wanted to do was to learn what mental well-being was and then pass those on to my kids. So it was almost like as I was learning this stuff, I was actually passing it on, because my focus became my kids' resilience. I figured, well, I don't really want them to go through it either. I guess genetically they are at slightly higher risk because I've had it myself. But I thought if I can give them the skills that I'm learning now in therapy and in recovery, then maybe they'll be a little bit more resilient. So managing their emotions, so teaching them about emotions. So I basically, whatever I learned, I just taught them. And I think it's kind of stood them in good stead, and also help-seeking as well, because my help-seeking was very poor. And it took me a long time to realise that help-seeking is actually a skill that you can develop and you can get good at it. And that help-seeking is actually a courageous act. So I kind of train them to help seek for themselves. My daughter's currently seeing a social worker at the moment to deal with some things that she's experiencing, but I'm training her how to get the best out of that experience and how to make doctor's appointments and, what to do in a doctor's appointment and what to ask for. And she said to me, she'd been to the social worker 3 times and she said, I'm getting nothing out of this. And I said, well, you need to talk to your social worker about that and say, where are we going here? And she said, I don't want to hurt her feelings. I said, it won't hurt her feelings. So I actually sat in for the first 5 minutes of their meeting and said, where are we going here? Because Abby's kind of feeling like she's not getting too much out of this. And the social worker said, oh, we can change it up. I'm really glad that you gave me that feedback. Let's try something different. So it's training them into how to get help before they actually hit rock bottom and get stuck like I did.
Thanks, John. And Bruce, speaking of help-seeking behaviour from fathers, can you describe a little bit about how the Fathering Project has engaged men who may previously had little understandings of their own mental health needs?
I think that's actually, I kept thinking about that as people were asking questions. Because you can imagine a bunch of dads, like every year we capture a bunch of dads who come along to the school and don't realise they've got any needs, or often don't realise, they're not doing a good job. They haven't come to a counselling session. And so, they just end up at a pizza and beer night, and there might be a video on, let's just say, men's mental health, which is a recent focus, or the other question, which was about what do kids really need, and they get a shake-up. So we reckon 80% of dads are in that category. They just stumble along thinking they're pretty good dads doing what their dad did or reacting to what their dad did. And so we're very proactive. So we get dads. So Gary hopefully wouldn't get to that point if he went to school when his oldest kids were 4 years old and he walked in and went to a dad's group, because he would sit around a table with someone like John who says, I got to rock bottom, and he thinks, hang on, I'm heading that way too. And so they engage then with professionals and also with the material we give them, because they get exposed to it in a safe and in an environment exactly like the blokes have described on this webinar, where there's trust, authenticity, it's non-threatening, you're not telling them they're a bad person, and you're giving them an aspirational goal that they can impact on their kids' lives and make a difference.
Thank you so much for that, Bruce. Dom, a question from Joss and others. How do you engage with a father who may be reluctant to engage, or may even be responding in unhelpful ways towards their children? How do you respond to that father in ways that are non-stigmatizing, but still put the centre of the focus of the interaction on the child?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Just trying to unpack that question. So I guess when you're saying unhelpful ways, I guess you're sort of saying when they're feeling like things aren't going the way they hoped or something.
Absolutely.
I think that's I guess that comes back to exploring the roles of dads and the roles that they can play, and maybe it comes back to what John was talking about sort of help-seeking behaviour. And the more you practice exploring those roles, the more you do that reflection around, the kind of dad you'd like to be, or the kind of dad that you'd hope to be. When you sort of reflect on those expectations and those hopes and those aspirations, you can start to sort of, in working with that data around that, you can start to sort of unpack some of those things that where they feel like maybe things aren't working out that well, but now they've got some options. And I think and in line with what Bruce said as well, is about providing dads with some things that they can do, rather than sort of saying these are things you shouldn't be doing. And so giving them some options in front of them, and maybe only one or two, but just, I guess they're coming up with the options themselves. You're sort of giving them a nudge or helping them reflect on that, on what they is perceiving as unhelpful. And then maybe some of the stuff that they think, is not working, maybe it doesn't need much of a change, but it's in those conversations that you're having with them about, so you're finding that when you talk to your teenage daughter, she doesn't want to talk back to you, maybe there's other ways that you can be trying to engage with her or communicate with her. And I've had that experience with dads where, particularly with teenagers, and there's, it's just really about sort of getting to know. It's really helpful. They can get to know what other dads are doing as well, and they can help with that. So sort of peer support, is so important, like from a dad's group, but also just in that, for you to share with them some things that other dads might have been doing, or even if it's just from your own experience as a worker, or your own, own things your dad did or whatever, or as a dad in your life, just giving them sort of really concrete examples, one or two things they can go take away and try to sort of mitigate that unhelpful stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Dom. And I read from your own organisation, Relationships Australia, that there's some data which says that some of the dads that come in are worried about the way they might be interacting with partners or children, that might not be particularly safe or their preferred way of fathering. How do you engage with those men in ways that are still engaging, but also that privilege safety?
Yeah. So I guess if we're talking about domestic and family violence, then and if when we're working with men who have used violence in their family, at Relationships Australia Victoria, we run lots of men's behaviour change programs, and family violence programs, and deal with lots of families coming through court separation matters. So there's a lot of family violence involved in all those dynamics. But For me, it's really about, it just, again, just starts with that fatherhood story. You've got to really, someone who's just got so much baggage that they're bringing to the table. And, you know, how can you unpack all that? You know, that maybe it's not even your role to unpack that stuff. But, you know, I guess you want to focus on what your service can provide. Or so being really, I guess, clear, again, coming back to that, you know, well, this is what you're going to get out of this, you know, this meeting, or this is what, you know, we would hope that you get out of it. You know, what did you come into expecting, you know, when you engage with the service? What did you expect you'd get out of it? And then, I guess, yeah, you've got to be really upfront and clear about the you know, whatever the behaviours and whether and how, you know, what's safe and what's unsafe. And then I guess one big thing that I've noticed is that people, you know, there's a perception that it's easier for a man to have a conversation with another man or around this kind of stuff. And when in men's behaviour change programs, there's always conversation about female facilitators doing that work with those men. And so there's you know, again, that's just coming back to talking to that dad around saying, well, you know, like this is obviously this could be an issue, but it's good to be upfront and clear about it, and just sort of highlight that this is not about, you know, gender, or this is not about, you know, who I am as a man or a woman, but this is about, you know, what you're going to get out of, you know, having this meeting or this service. And then collusion is something else that comes up. I think that we're seeing that people, I guess, really concerned about that they might be colluding with someone if they're perpetrating violence, and you know, they're sort of really stuck in that cycle. I guess it's just coming back to that, being really clear and upfront, and knowing, you know, being prepared when you go into those conversations, that if there's a line that's been crossed, that you actually just pull it up straight away and say, we've got to, you know, come back. And then bringing that focus back to the fatherhood is really important, even if they're not living with their kids, if they're identity, and that's maybe the only thing they're hanging on to. So while you don't want to sort of pander to what their behaviour and feel like you're contributing to sort of saying their behaviour is okay, because maybe that's what they think, but, you know, focusing on the fatherhood is a really strong motivator to say, well, you know, being a dad, you know, how important is that to you? You know, just having that conversation can be really, really helpful.
Thank you, John. Great questions. I wish we could sit here and answer all of these questions tonight. So thanks to all of you in the chat room and the 691 of you who are watching. These questions have been fantastic. Final question, there's a couple here for you, Bruce, about just around a little bit more detail around the Fathering Project. And in particular, Sonia and Leslie and others ask questions around how does the Fathering Project cater for different types of dads? For example, dads from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds.
Yeah, another great question. And we have a particular desire to make sure that we engage in different demographics. So we actually, for example, in a very culturally and very diverse group south of Perth, we have a full-time Fathering Project worker. And if you watched Compass, I think, on ABC a few weeks ago, you'd have seen a video. No, I think we've got a real heart for that. It's obviously more difficult, but we really want to make sure that works. We've also had a project with the Indigenous Australians, Aboriginal Australian dads and father figures in that, working with them, working out how best to engage with them. So now we have a heart for it, and we've still got a lot of work to do, but we are engaged. And I should just mention one thing about the mothers, now that I think about it, because those questions came from a couple of females. I was really scared when the Fathering Project started that we would get criticised for being gender biased. I even asked a feminist friend of mine how I could answer an angry person at the microphone. I didn't want to offend anyone. In 15 years of doing this, not one time have we had blowback like that. What we've found, because we totally honour the role of women and we do not get involved in politics or anything like that, issues of sexuality or anything, we just focus on father figures. And we have been, the women in the schools have said, we love the fathering project. And going to that, just to finish that last question about partners and marriages, we always get the dad's attention in a school dad's room by saying, look, it's been statistically shown that if you become a better dad, your sex life will improve. And that gets their attention straight away. But of course, it's about mothers feeling like they're not doing all the parenting, and not being tired and not being honoured in their role. So, yeah.
Thank you, Bruce. That concludes the Q&A portion of tonight's webinar, and thanks to our panellists for answering those questions. That's been really insightful. Thank you. I'm just going to now invite all our three panellists just to any final thoughts or summing up what you've said in about a minute each, if that's okay. So, Dom, I might start with you.
Thanks, Dan. Summing up, I guess it's the stuff that I focused on is really about the identity of that dad that you're working with. Trying to find some way to encourage him to reflect on that, what it means to be him to be a dad, what he does as a dad, what he loves to do, what he finds hard, all those things. Just really getting those stories out is really important, and it just helps. Maybe there's a lot of things that the dad that he's actually doing really well, and he's just not even seeing that, because he's just stuck in the negative stuff. So that's really important, I think, to focus on, and just and that links into the roles that dads can play, and that's a big thing that I've noticed is that dads, maybe they're stuck or they're not sure where they want to go next, or they just maybe they don't want to play that role as a dad, and they've got options, I guess, giving dads options, that things that they can do and that they love doing.
Thank you so much, Dom. John, I'll invite you to sum up.
Yeah, I guess summing up, for men to get help with stuff is a significant problem because we like to kind of own our own stuff and be independent and strong and bulletproof, and to then kind of not be succeeding and to have to get help, there is a lot of feelings of I'm weak, I've failed, I'm hopeless, and I'm ashamed and embarrassed about that. So for someone to be able to manage that and kind of even address it maybe is really helpful. In the Man Up project on ABC, Professor Jane Purkis was at a conference. I was listening to her, and she said, my final message is there's no shame in getting help. And as a participant, I was sitting there, I thought there is actually a lot of shame in getting help. So I think if we can manage that and deal with it and diffuse that, build that rapport, and then give the bloke the skills and tools he's after, because that's what we're after. We want to do a bang-up job of being a great dad, but we just don't have the skills and tools to do that. You're just not inherently born with that. So if you can position yourselves as someone that they just outsource their dad stuff to get feedback, strategies, tools and skills, then we're all ears. We want that stuff.
Thank you so much, John. And Bruce?
Yeah, look, honestly, Dan, I've learned a lot myself tonight listening to these guys. Really appreciate it. And I guess my take-home message is, in addition to, not instead of, the professional help, functioning in a platoon, not as a solo Rambo, works really well for all sorts of reasons that we've discussed tonight. So I'd encourage everyone listening to get the people they know in their orbit, in their professional lives or whatever, or themselves, if they're a dad, to engage with the platoon generating fathering project. It's the Bunnings Plus, and I've just written down this thing. You can do it yourself. We're just there to help you do it, DIY, and we're there to help you do it. So I encourage people to get the dads engaged in the platoon. And just Google the Fathering Project to do that.
Thank you so much, Bruce, and to all our panellists. So before we leave you tonight, just a message on resources, including resources on the Fathering process, the Fathering Project, and further reading. You can access that by the blue Resources tab. And for more information on engaging fathers and all sorts of information on children's mental health, please visit the Emerging Minds website on www.emergingminds.com.au. And please keep an ear out for our future webinars. We've loved being able to present to you tonight. Our next webinar is on practice skills of working with children who have experienced trauma. That's going to be a really worthwhile evening. That's on the 19th of November in a couple of weeks now. Also, please remember that the next MHPN webinar is on children and grief, and that's beginning on the night of the December the 10th. So I hope you can also make that. Just a few words about the partnership between MHPN and Emerging Minds. This webinar was co-produced by our two projects. The Emerging Minds National Workforce Centre is funded by the Australian Government Department of Health under the National Support for Child and Youth Mental Health Program. And if you'd like to continue the conversation around engaging fathers, MHPN has 373 networks. Project officers are available to help connect you to interdisciplinary networks across metropolitan, regional, rural and remote Australia. If you're interested in joining or starting a network, please visit the online map or contact Jackie O'Loughlin at networks@mhpn.org.au. So thanks for participating tonight. You'll receive a statement of attendance for tonight within 4 to 6 weeks. Please ensure that you complete the feedback survey, the yellow tab. It's really important that we get your feedback so that we can keep improving what we provide for you. Each participant will be sent a link to the recording of this webinar and associated online resources within 4 to 6 weeks. And before I close, I'd just like to acknowledge the consumers and carers who have lived with mental illness in the past and those who continue to live with mental illness in the present. Thank you to everyone for participating this evening. Good night.